there. Welcome to Leading Change Conversations, the podcast where we tackle real-life challenges with leaders like you to make organizational change a breeze. In this episode, we will explore the complex task of navigating large-scale layoffs within your team. We'll explore both the organizational and emotional aspects of managing this challenge. So stay tuned if you want to get insights firsthand. I am Ulrike Seminati. I am your host, and I train, coach, and inspire leaders to turn into successful change agents, to communicate with impact, and to lead with authenticity. So now let me introduce you to our amazing guest, Sally Jones. Sally, originally from UK, now living in Switzerland, has 30 years of finance experience, including the last 7 years in the C-suite. She has worked in practice financial services and aviation services industries, in public and privately owned companies. Sally has experienced an impressive number of transformation exercises in her career: M&A, financing, reporting, audit, and ESG. Welcome, Sally.
Hi, Ulrike. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And I'm very curious what we will discuss today, because we will speak about one of these situations that are most likely the most challenging of any career of a leader. And that is when you have to lay off parts of your team. In your situation, it was even a huge part of your team. Do you want to explain the situation first to give us a bit of a context?
Okay, so the company I worked for at the time, it was a large organization, quite often actually reorganized itself, was at the forefront of maybe some financial transformation exercises. In this particular one, it was a global exercise. It was impacting a number of entities, and they were doing a complete finance transformation where they were setting up shared service centers in various places, which meant sort of centralizing various functions and setting up new systems, offshoring, a number of different things. Because it was a group-led exercise, obviously it had support from the top, and there was a lot of so there was a very much an objective behind it in terms of actually sort of just transforming the whole function. And that actually helped in a way because it meant that the message was coming from the top. It was supported by the top. There was no discussion. There was no, oh, yes, but this isn't allowed for our area. It was a case of it was a broad exercise, which actually was a benefit to us at the local level because it meant that we weren't just the only ones going through this. It was across a number of different jurisdictions. And to a certain extent, that also took the personal element out of it as well. But obviously, it did impact a lot of people. So from my perspective, the organization I had at the time, I was the financial admin head of the area. And I had accounts payable, accounts receivable, the reporting, financial reporting, and large admin function as well. So all the finance areas, so that's AP, AR, and general ledger, were all actually going to be put into a shared service center in another European country, and then ultimately to an Indian shared service center. And then also the admin side, which was based in one location, was actually going to be centralized in a different location as well. So at one point, as finance and admin manager, I had 36 staff reporting to me. And at the end of the transformation, I had 2 or 3 staff reporting to me.
That's a huge change, yeah.
So it's a big change, yes. Not only, obviously, for the people concerned, but actually also for me as well.
Yeah, exactly. And before we go into, how you handled it during that phase, what was your first reaction? What was your emotional response to that? Because you learned it from your leadership that this will happen. How did you feel about that?
I think at first, the way it was first explained, we were all sat around a room and it was explained to us and it made sense. The fact that there was a finance transformation going ahead. The company that we were working for reorganized itself quite often, every couple of years. So in that respect, it wasn't really a surprise. But I think over the next 24 hours, you suddenly realized the impact it was going to have on all the staff, on what you had to do, and on you yourself. So I think it was a 2-day meeting. The first day was explained. We all went out and got drunk that evening. The next day you come in and actually realize that actually your job is going to dramatically change. And is it really actually what you want to do at the end of the day?
Mhm. I'm staying a bit on the personal level because I think that's really interesting. How much did that impact on this first day or the second day afterwards when you start really realizing the massive impact on yourself and on the people as well, but it is also on yourself to some
Yeah.
point? How did you manage that? Did you go through it in a way that you tried to quickly get into a more, how to say, neutral mode so that you are able to execute on what was asked from you? Or was it really difficult for you to get out of that and you were carrying quite a lot of mixed emotions around with you? How did you manage it actually?
I think it was the shock kicked in the second day in what it actually had as an impact to me and the other people around the table. We were all starting to look at each other saying, our jobs are going to completely change. Is it really actually what we want at the end of the day? But I think we decided, and I think I can speak for most of the other people around the table as well, we decided to sort of switch off that emotional level from our own personal experience and actually get on with the task in hand, see it through, because for a start, you knew it was the right thing to do. It was a good exercise. You had to actually try and stay professional throughout it. It was good experience for us. And you also owed it to your team to make sure that it was handled the best way possible. So it wasn't the idea to say, well, I can't handle this, let somebody else do it. And then really it was a case of, well, let's go through the exercise, see how it really pans out, because obviously sometimes these things change. Maybe there's a different time span to it. Maybe there is something at the end that's a bit more than what you're expecting left at the end of it as well. And then it was a case of, well, let's see how it works out, see what you get at the end. If that's still enjoyable, if it's still rewarding, you stay. If you maybe look for another job within the organization, that was always the possibility. It was an organization where you could move around. So there was always this option at the end of the day that if that particular role, what was left wasn't ideal, then maybe there could be something else somewhere else actually on the cards as well. But it was a good organization and a lot of people enjoyed working there. A lot of people still actually have some family feel about this.
Mhm. Yeah, is that something that is important and I think can be a good tip for someone who is in a similar situation? When you fall into this, I don't know, black hole of frustration of, my God, why is this happening now? Everything will be taken away. You said you thought also it could be a good experience. And I think this is a great way of seeing challenges because oftentimes we fall too quickly into the trap of thinking very pessimistically about it, like, oh, why is this happening to me? We put ourselves into a victim position and seeing it as a new experience is obviously something that is very positive because that opens the possibility, well, to be open for the experience and to just do what needs to be done, learn from it, and go through it with this mindset, whatever is the outcome at the end. And I like your approach as well to stay very open on the outcome because for sure there was an outcome communicated, but we also know that in reality the outcome is always different in a certain way. Is it on yourself, on the people within your team, or also a different position, like you said, could maybe be there? And I think this is really great to stay there with an open mindset, despite the fact that there's the opportunity, obviously, to fall into a victim position, which you did not, which you likely, very fortunately, did not take. And you also said something important. I think this is also the reason that helps. And I think organizations also need to think about that, or CEOs when they launch such a restructuring project, is really how do you create a company where people can believe in, where there is a level of trust? Because companies with a high level of trust and satisfaction within the organization obviously have a different reaction to these really bad news for certain people so that they can then handle it in a much, much more constructive way. Now, let's go through the process a little bit. You said in the beginning, as it was an exercise coming from the top, you were obviously helped when it came to why we're doing this, the purpose of all of that. And you also said it made sense. And for many people, when something makes sense, it's much easier to digest. So how did it go on then? What did you get from your organization as help when you had to announce it to your team? Did you have actually to announce it to your team? Was it done in a big town hall? Just give us a bit of background about that.
A lot of information and a lot of support actually came from the central and the regional teams. So there was a full PowerPoint presentation which had all the explanations behind it. There was questions and answers. We were allowed to give feedback into that pack before it actually was published, so that if we could think of any other questions that came through. And I think that was quite a good exercise, because we walked away from that 2-day meeting with obviously a lot of questions. We churned some of them through. We talked about some of them. We were allowed then to feed back into the PowerPoint presentation coming from the group what sort of questions would be likely to actually come from the team. And then at each local level, there were meetings where we had to actually sort of present that information. And obviously, when you're called into that meeting, something is going to happen. And I think it's also very important that you're open about that. Yes, we're going to, there's an announcement to be made, but wait for the meeting, and then all the details will be a little bit clearer. News always actually filters out. Rumors actually start somewhere along the line. So you have to actually act relatively quickly, because a lot of people, when they start thinking about things, they will make things worse in their head than they possibly are. So yes, it was the timing, and it was all choreographed in terms of, you will have a meeting that day, try and have all the entities, all the locations having a meeting on the same day or within a couple of days, so that you didn't have one location talking to another location. Then all the information was actually clearly set out, the questions and answers, most of which were expected, and therefore we had a ready answer to them. Most of them were localized. What's actually going to happen to me? What's the time frame? Will there be a job at the end of it for me? Can I relocate? Is there going to be a package? And I think obviously the redundancy packages, the situation there changes in different countries. Some countries, we're based here in Switzerland, it's not an automatic legal requirement to pay redundancy, but if there is actually a certain number of people affected by the group, then you have some sort of social plan. And that had all been worked out beforehand as well. So those informations were clear. It wasn't necessarily that you could sit there in that meeting saying you will get X, Y, Z, but obviously there was then secondary meetings that you could have with the HR department, and then those sorts of discussions could actually be happening as well.
Mm. Yeah, so I see it was really well orchestrated, what you say, also from an organizational perspective. And what is really good practice, what you just said, is that you get a number of Q&A, but then you as a leader, the next level leaders actually who are coming in, you can complete it. Like you say, you gave feedback. And I think this is very important, that it is really made for the people. And then what you also said, it's localized as well. There are some questions, obviously, which are very specific in certain locations, but that leaders were really helped with these. So they did not have to think about, oh God, but in my location, what should I do with this Q&A that is now coming from the group, which I can't, well, I can use it, but it's answering only half of the questions that I will have in my room. Now, the discussion as such, how did you go into it? Before this moment, before this day, before this meeting, how did you feel, coming back to the emotional level, how did you feel about that? Was it tense for you? Was it, how did you feel?
I mean, it was, but there was a good team around me. And I knew that there were a lot of people that had been there a long time. So in that respect, they knew that the company reorganized every few years. And I think if there were other ones that were younger ones, then they were at the beginning of their career and they weren't necessarily at the stage where they expected to be in the company 20 years. So in that respect, I knew it was not going to be as confrontational as it could be. And I knew people were professional. They would obviously consider their own situation, but I knew that they would actually treat it reasonably well. But obviously that was something relatively new to me at that time, actually, especially going through such a big transformation. It was nervous to begin with, but I knew that it wasn't going to be a complete disaster, shall we say.
Mm. How did it go then? Because you had over 30 people who learned by that time then that they will have to leave the company, or at least the role they are in right now. And like you say, different situations, obviously. Some were there for a long time. Often for those who are there for a long time, it's very, very hard as well, especially if they have not really changed roles during 2 decades, for example. And what did happen afterwards? Did you have one-on-one discussions? And also, give us a bit of a time frame between the announcement or this meeting and the time they really had to leave the company. Were there a few months in between? Were there just a few weeks? How quickly was this then turned around? And what happened during this phase?
I think at the meeting itself went relatively well. People were murmuring, people asked questions, people left the room. I think maybe to a certain extent similar to when we were actually told that they could hear it, but they had to then sort of absorb it over the next couple of days. So over the next week or so, we actually then had one-to-one meetings with people. We explained and effectively started from the managers and moved down to the supervisors and the individuals. We explained exactly what the time frame was for their particular departments. Some was actually quicker than others. Some was a matter of months. So most of it was for 3 to 6 months. And then there was some that actually it carried on for another year or 18 months actually to get the full picture through. So I think over that time scale, obviously people sort of accepted it. There were some changes to the plan. There were some changes to the timeline. Some things took a little bit longer. But overall, it was actually well received and well respected. There obviously were some individuals that were more badly affected by it than others, and some of those were in a position to be able to try and make it difficult. But I think we overcame that by the understanding, the explanations, and the fact that, it's not personal. That was a very clear message all the way through. It's not personal. It's not that you've done a bad job. It's nothing against you specifically. The company's going through a reorganization. It's not you being made redundant. It's actually your job being made redundant. And that actually helped people along the way. There was obviously a lot of support for people that were leaving in terms of providing retraining exercises or outplacement services. And I was very pleasantly surprised by one particular group who put themselves out a lot to work overtime during that period to make sure that all the accounts were reconciled before they were handed over. I was always very pleasantly surprised by that one and will continue to be very pleasantly surprised by that one. They all showed a huge amount of professionalism. And I think that really puts it down to, not only them as individuals, but also I think the whole way that it had been communicated, I think was very positive in that respect. And that was the way it actually came through.
Yeah, that is indeed interesting. And it is very rare because that was my next question. Usually these kind of layoffs, like you say, run between 3 and 18 months, a long period of time sometimes. And oftentimes the teams who are staying longer, or for a year for some, for example, they then have to prepare the fertile ground for those who will take over their roles. And often when this is in what we perceive as a low-cost country, people are very frustrated about that because they have the feeling my work is not really valued. They just give it away to someone. And all of these emotions are there around. And like what I hear from you, for at least parts of your team, this was not the case. That means they felt like, no, we did a good job. We want also the others to do a good job. And we will do our utmost to help them to have a great position to start from. And I think this is really extraordinary. Was this something that you have seen also in other parts of your team or even beyond your team in other teams?
What I've seen in other areas is that hasn't worked quite so well. You've had some people who have taken, in other reorganizations, you've had some people that have actually taken the whole situation badly and have then actually tried to be disruptive to the handover process. And I think then there have also been some other areas. I think there's a tendency for the new people to come in, wherever it may be, to expect things to be good or expect things to be, in accounting, for example, expect things to be reconciled. And if things aren't, then there's a very easy tendency to blame the people that are no longer there, to make themselves look good, and it makes the whole reorganization justified. And I think that's unfair in some instances. It's not always easy to actually see what was going on in the previous department beforehand. Then I think what I've also seen is an element of survivor's guilt in some instances as well. And I don't think that's always actually that easy to address and has been necessarily addressed. And I've seen that a lot where people are actually losing their colleagues around them. And on the one hand, when the announcement comes through and they realise they're not on that list, it's a case of it's a relief. That's great. And then when they start losing their colleagues around them, then they start thinking, oh, why was it them and not me? That's unfair. Or also they end up with more work themselves, because sometimes it's not just as straightforward, you lose somebody and the work disappears. So I think there are a lot of factors to be considered in reorganizations, both in the planning, the communication, and also, the aftermath and a post-mortem, to make sure that the people still on the ground are actually, that they're actually okay as well.
Mm. And I think you say something super important here, survivor's guilt. When I was in my C-level role, in my last corporate role, I had to contribute and participate also in a restructuring of about 10% of the total population in Switzerland, which was very, very difficult and was falling on a very unfruitful ground because the company had gone through many transformations, has seen many C-level executives coming in and going out, and the level of trust was very low. So we had big, big difficulties to turn it around actually in a constructive way, like you say. But what I have seen in this situation as well is that the people who stay are often much less cared of than those who leave, because those who leave, they get their package, they have more discussions, they have obviously very often an HR connection point where they can go to it and really try. And I think today, even more than 5 or 10 years ago, we really try to take care of the mental health of the people who are concerned by the layoff. But the others, we don't care that much, because often we think, well, they stay, so they don't have a problem. Whereas I have seen in my past organization, 3 people going into burnout who were not concerned by the layoffs because of survivor's guilt, because they had a profile which was very, very people-oriented, and they had such a high level of empathy with the colleagues who lost their job that they couldn't deal with it at all. The 3 people that you had left in your team, how did that go specifically? How did you work with them during that period, even after that period? What was happening with your survivors?
I think they had a different role and their roles weren't impacted. So I think they were pleased in that respect. But of course, at the end of the day, at one instance, you had a whole floor of offices, people around you. There was your colleagues. And I think at the end of the day, when you're just left with 2 or 3 people, you can't just leave them with empty offices, for example. So we had a number of discussions about how they felt, very informal discussions. It wasn't really anything to do with HR. It was just actually as a team. It was just us and a team. And we wanted to actually make sure that we were still a part of the organization. So, we moved into different offices so that we had different people around us. And I think that helped enormously, so that you were still considered part of the organization, even though there was significantly less of a finance team there. They also then had to deal with other people in different organizations, in different locations, to getting the information that they wanted. So that actually proved difficult as well. Ultimately, they all stayed, certainly for a while. So that was actually a good message as well. But I think, yes, you have to make sure that they considered. I think in some instances, you get a retention package paid for the people that are leaving to get them to stay, to make sure that they actually hand over properly. It might also be worth considering sometimes a retention package for those people that are actually impacted nonetheless. But I think in terms of the soft skills, the conversations, how does it make you feel? Is there anything we can actually do to boost that morale some other way?
I think connecting on an emotional level during that phase with people is more important than ever. I think in general, leadership is a lot about connecting on an emotional level, even though if many leaders prefer to stay on a more factual level because it feels safer and more predictable, obviously. But it's so much more strength into just connecting on a human-to-human basis, really, not on I'm a task executor and you're another task executor basis, let's say. Especially in these phases, because people need that. They need to understand, hey, I'm also taken care of. I'm not just because you stay, we don't have to care of you. Your role will change. And that's just a normal role change. But at the end, it's not just a normal role change because it's much more complex than that. If you see your whole environment getting more and more empty week by week or month by month, it's actually
Mhm.
really difficult, I think. Now, to wrap up the discussion and your situation, because it's a story actually of this whole transformation you've gone through, this whole layoff process as well of your team. You then at the end, there's never an end, but when you had then your 3 people left, and it was all over, and the new organization was in place. How was that? Were you more motivated? Did you find motivation? Did you like that new role? What was your outlook then once it was over, if you can call it like that?
I think, yes, so my role certainly changed effectively from a finance manager to a head of finance. I mean, they gave you a role change, a title change, but you're talking a head of finance of 3 people. So I think at that point, the role was focused much more on the business side of the organization. So that's the side that I've always actually enjoyed, supporting the business. So in that respect, it was good. I could focus more of my time on supporting the business, being a lot more involved in things like sales and operations and that side of it. So it was actually quite rewarding in the actual job itself. The company reorganized a little while later and had a sort of a different focus. And I think sometimes there are too many reorganizations, and it's time to put your hand up and say, okay, it's my turn.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, I think it's a great insight that you gave us, Sally, and a very personal one at the same time, because it's a restructuring that was heavy on your shoulders, certainly for that period. And at the end, you turned it around in a good way. But we also see that alone as a leader, we can't do that. Often we feel like I have to do it. It's for my team. I stand up for my team and these kind of things. But leaders really need the help of the whole organization. You also need to feel part of a group of other leaders who are in a similar situation, that you have peers you can speak to, and that you really get the help from the organization when it comes to the whole framework around it, which is not only about the packages or something like that, which is obviously important, but it's also about what's the message and how can we build a message that is credible also for my team, especially, like you said in the beginning. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Sally. And I wish you really all the best in your future endeavors. And it was great to have you as a guest.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to the audience for tuning into Leading Change Conversations today. So if you want to improve your own skills on leading change or communication more effectively, check out my courses for individuals on my website. I have quite a few useful 90 minutes online classes there around overcoming procrastination, surmounting change resistance, communicating with impact, and also influencing through presence. And until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and making a difference.